Well, I think any commemoration really is as much about the present as it is about the past. And of course we live in a world where we've had rising inequality. We're seeing the rise of strident nationalism and populism again. There are ongoing wars across the world. And I think this commemoration and thinking about the voices of war and peace is a chance to really reflect on where we are now as much as it is on the past.
Sometimes it's about locality and place and a sense of connection with that, but quite often it's not. It's about some other interest or some sense of community or shared identity, some shared passion. I think that's what's really interesting about it, is that there is this enormous range and diversity.
For me, it's been about personal contributions of people from the African Caribbean community and the fact that we've had to tell their stories and tell their contributions to the war. Prior to 2014, this information was very well known or wasn't very well documented. And for me, now it gives us a chance to talk about their personal legacy.
It's been interesting that lots of people have commented that they mostly learnt about the Western Front and they mostly learnt about fighting, and suddenly they've realised that there were many more stories of the home front, of the effect on families, of troops from the Empire, now the Commonwealth, of communities in Britain, what happened to refugees and other people. And we've been really pleased that that's an opportunity to shine a light on those stories.
Remembrance has become, it's without context, it's become militarised, it focuses on the military, and the red poppy has come to represent a sort of view of nationalism, and there's a vilification if you don't wear the red poppy if you're on TV.
Phrases like "we will remember them lest they forget," I think they're very ingrained in a lot of people, and therefore they will feel driven to attend a public memorial event. But the people that come to the museum events, to the lectures and the talks and the exhibitions, or those who actively participate as volunteers in a project, those numbers are going to be a little smaller, but that just reflects the levels of interest of people who are involved.
For some people, I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to interact, get communities themselves a sense of their identity, of their history. I think to me, at this point, there is a slight feeling of disappointment. I thought at the beginning we'd be able to really expand the sense of the First World War, get lots of different histories out there, sort of stretch some of the myths, challenge some of the myths. And at the end of it, it still feels like an awful lot of the Battle of the Somme and an awful lot of poppies, whether ceramic, knitted or what have you, invariably red. Physical disability, mental disability in a period of time when you haven't got a National Health Service and you haven't got a welfare state in the way that we know it nowadays, where people are going to come back and they and their families and their communities are going to live with those horrors for years. I think that's not come through the system.
The pace of political events, it just appears to be overtaking all of it. What's happening now probably does have to be put in a historical context, and the projects that have brought in the voices of people who are underrepresented are the ones who really should be listened to get that context.
I think working on our current project, Journey from Home, it's more looking at the experiences and the lives of soldiers, so we're picking up certain stories, but along the way, when community members have got involved, like the school that we're working with, one of the students, she's actually said, my great-great-great-grandfather was in First World War, and she's picked out a story and now relating it to modern history that actually this is amazing, and to be involved in all that and bringing it to life and giving people a platform to talk about their research, that's a dream.
What I've learnt about this in particular is about the importance of building connections. So not just about connections between universities and communities or heritage organisations or other partners, but it's also about encouraging people to share ideas and share experiences and put things alongside one another.
But we're learning all the time about what it requires to get out there, the effort involved. Even just filling 10 seats at an event is very difficult. And I think the last 4 years have really fast-tracked us through that engagement process and enabled libraries, archives, museums and universities to really find their way a bit more.
We've learnt that it is fun, exciting, gives people a lot of personal benefits, but is also quite challenging. Obviously in the centenary there's been a lot happening where groups are telling similar stories, and getting your story to be noticed and engaged is quite hard. Many of the projects have said that they're really pleased to be part of a national moment, a long moment, 5 years of a moment, but that gives them an opportunity to be very much with other groups, to share those stories and to work with new partners.
I've been involved in a project that looks at the history of the Belgian refugees. This is a kind of underrepresented history. It's sort of a hidden history, and I'm still surprised at how few people are aware of this particular moment in the history of the First World War in this country. But that project's enabled me to be in touch with numerous local history groups, and it's made me aware of just how much research is going on in small pockets all over the country. My experience of the centenary has also shown me that academics are definitely not the only people who are prepared to devote a whole life's work to researching a moment in our history. And that's really come through very, very clearly to me.
It was absolutely invaluable for us to engage with Living Legacies. Obviously they were an integral part. We took participants through from a desktop research, looking at GIS systems, through to the fieldwork. Having those resources at their fingertips to bring in other expertise. The museum was able to connect local community members with the academics.
I think the things we've learnt about how to engage with community groups are it needs time. It needs time to develop trust, to develop joint understanding around where there's shared interests, and find the right ways to pursue research that's relevant to different community groups.
I have that anxiety that because of the amount of time it takes, the effort it takes, and the different framework of universities that now exists, I'm not sure that that will go on in the way that I would have liked into the future. I think people, and a lot of my postgrads have worked on it, will they be convinced that this is the way to go in terms of an academic career? I suspect it might be more problematic as it takes so much time, so much energy, and you're under so much pressure to do other things at this moment in time.
We were looking at, if you like, the genesis of an amazing social housing estate in the west of Cardiff, once the largest social housing estate in the UK. And it was built on garden village principles. And this was really a vision of peace. It was a vision of a better world with good housing for everybody. And in the current climate, where we have things like the bedroom tax and we have rising homelessness and rising poverty, that is an interesting story to tell, especially when working with young people, as we did, alongside the older generation who were the first people to move into those homes.
For the past 4 years, what I've taken from the project is a personal sense of pride, looking at the point of history from a British point of view, but also being able to stand proud and talk about African Caribbean ancestry, but also looking at people that I know who have come on board. Some weren't friends before but are now, working together as a team to deliver a piece of work, an academic piece of work that will stand the test of time as part of the legacy.
I think it's becoming a more militaristic society, and that is something that the Peace Pledge Union is very, very unhappy about. We're very worried about it. That's why we welcome being part of this particular project and welcome the opportunity to get our voice heard.
I think it's important to acknowledge that the perspective in Northern Ireland around commemoration activity is a little different. We're working in a different political context. Commemoration is more political and tied to political identities. I would suggest perhaps that's because it's taught differently in schools, but I know there has been a lot of work done where communities have come together to share experiences and allowed for a plurality of narratives.
We have a notion when someone mentions community that it's something nice and warm and fuzzy. But of course in Britain at the moment there are numerous communities. The communities are in tension with one another. There are splits in communities. And so community working is actually quite complex because of that. And it's made me really think quite critically about who the communities are that we reach, who feels entitled to tell their history and who doesn't, and is there ways of reaching those who don't necessarily feel entitled.
If disabled people were mentioned from it, it was usually in terms of being pitiable, being victims, and the great tragedy of the loss of human life and the loss of human potential. We wanted to show that although the war had devastating consequences, in terms of social reform, it actually kick-started an awful lot of changes in society. Disabled people were affected by those changes, but disabled people were also instruments of that change.
The First World War and Second World War are iconic elements of British history and European history, and those are the kind of points of reference in many ways for thinking about what makes you British or European or what have you. So now to kind of infuse that diversity story into there, but one that isn't tokenistic, because it's, if you look at the 1.5 million Indian troops in the army, if you look at the hundreds of thousands from Africa and the Caribbean, millions, then you start to realise it wasn't a little bit, it was a significant part of that story.
Showing academics, it's showing community. I think it's just showing people you can wake up one day and say, hang on a minute, I want to learn more. And you don't have to rely on search engines, you can actually speak to people in that field.
The anniversary has also been a really great way of bringing together universities, cultural and educational institutions, heritage institutions, the HRC, HLF, all working together to collectively find opportunities to work with the general public and find ways to make heritage meaningful to them. Hopefully confidence, more confidence in cultural organisations and community organisations undertaking, initiating their own research, getting in touch with academics and the academy to work with in close collaboration. I hope it'll also give more confidence to university students and researchers to not be afraid to put communities at the heart of their research.
It's very much a living legacy, and I think it'll be further down the line before we can tell what that impact is going to be. We had a granite memorial marker installed, and I think that those very physical reminders can reach out to the next generation, and in that way hopefully we can sustain the legacy and the memories.
So I think public bodies, funding bodies, policy makers even need to think hard about how they can continue to support those who are trying to forge a career in the academy. These are the next generation of researchers. Arguably they're driving the field forward in terms of research, but they're also engaging in the early part of their career with this idea of working outside of the academy, with being sort of outward facing.
What's interesting is that we've seen a real kind of exploration of the diversity of experience of the First World War and understanding the complexities around that diversity. So the role of women, for example, has been highlighted. Minority ethnic communities have been highlighted. Which I think, if you like, challenge traditional myths.
If a region doesn't understand its history, how do we then get to independence, which is another story which came out of the First World War? 16,500 men from the Caribbean fought in the war, and we don't know their personal stories. And even with the project that we've actually done, we still don't know not even 10%. So it gives us a chance to reflect on this and create legacy, not just here, but in the Caribbean.
You meet the difficulty head on of where people get their histories from, where they gain their knowledge from, whether it means something to be a historian in the present day, when everybody has a sense of ownership about their past, everybody could go on the internet, everybody can gain narratives and myths and stories, and sometimes those are quite inaccurate, though they're really firmly held.
What one community partner said to me is expertise. He said, there are no experts here. He said, we all have expertise. And it's about learning to respect that and trust that and find it. And it's about thinking about what the relationship is between all those different sorts of activities. And it's about building relationships of trust around those different activities.
But there's so much more, and there's an overspill, especially in the projects that we do. There's so much more research that you can't include in an exhibition. So what do we do with that? Is it forgotten? And what we've done then is creating a website so we can put the overspill of the information there.
I've been surprised that more than 120 organisations have done a second project, and lots of them are expressing interest in other stories they've found which are perhaps coming out of the First World War. I think the special element that we've had working with the AHRC engagement centres has been that people have a deeper understanding of the stories, They don't necessarily take what they read the first time without interrogating it, thinking about it, and that will be an important legacy. One of the reasons we strongly wanted to do this partnership